Welcome to The Explainer. I'm really glad you're here. Today, we're diving into something deeply fascinating, but also profoundly personal for a lot of us: the hidden psychological layers of a difficult upbringing. We're going to look at how our early environments don't just shape our memories, they literally build the architecture of our survival. If you've ever felt like your reactions to the world are just kind of different than everyone else's, well, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this because it challenges a massive assumption we make as a society. We kind of have this default idea that a difficult childhood leaves someone looking visibly broken, right? Like they're obviously struggling. But psychology shows us something entirely different. The people carrying the absolutely heaviest psychological burdens frequently appear to be the most functional, responsible, unshakable people in any given room. So why is that?
Well, it's because there's this massive gap between outward appearance and internal reality. On the outside, you might look highly independent. You're incredibly capable, right? People rely on you constantly. But on the inside, the reality is that your brain has been quietly rewired. You're carrying this profound psychological weight that literally no one else can see. You're balancing a deeply adapted nervous system while just trying to go about your day.
And that brings us to a really hard truth. These aren't just personality traits, they are survival mechanisms. Let that sink in for a second. If you've ever been told you're too intense or too independent or maybe too sensitive, you really need to understand that these aren't just quirky little personality flaws. Think of them as armor. These are biological tools your brain brilliantly developed to keep you safe in a totally unpredictable environment. So, how exactly does this armor work? Let's start with our first theme: how a difficult past completely changes the way we manage our emotional environment, and specifically, how we view other people.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it reframes something so common. People often call this having a gut feeling, right? Or they say they're just highly intuitive. But notice the true clinical vocabulary we're using here: hypervigilance. When you grow up in an unsafe environment, your brain adapts by becoming this high-tech radar system. It is constantly, and I mean constantly, scanning for the absolute slightest hint of emotional danger to protect you from what might happen next. And because of that hypervigilance, you develop a skill called instant emotional mapping. You can walk into a room and instantly notice a sudden shift in someone's tone of voice. You catch that subtle microexpression flit across a friend's face. You sense an invisible shift in the energy of the room that literally everyone else is completely blind to. This rapid-fire processing isn't magic. It's a deeply ingrained survival skill that simply never got the memo to turn off. And that heightened awareness often leads directly right into our next trait: chronic emotional accountability. This is that deep, almost compulsive need to keep everyone around you happy, calm, or stable. And listen, this goes way beyond normal empathy. This stems from early emotional role reversal. As a kid, you realize that to keep yourself safe, you first have to manage and regulate the emotions of the unpredictable adults around you. You can actually trace this rewiring on a clear chronological journey. It always starts with an unsafe environment. Then the child actively manages the adult's emotions just to maintain peace. And finally, that manifests later in life as intense adult people-pleasing or crushing guilt when someone else is upset. You don't just care about other people. Your nervous system is screaming at you that you are personally, fundamentally accountable for their emotional state. Which brings us to our second big theme. We've talked about how we view others, but how does a trauma survivor's nervous system interpret their physical surroundings? Well, surprisingly, calmness actually starts to feel dangerous. It's a tragic irony, really. For a normal nervous system, peace equals safety, and silence equals a chance to rest. Sounds nice, right? But for a traumatized nervous system, stability feels like a trap. It just feels temporary. Silence doesn't feel restful at all. It feels incredibly strange, completely undeserved, and honestly, sometimes outright dangerous. So, the crucial point is that this calmness threat reflex completely dictates your behavior. Think about it. When peace feels dangerous, what do? You stay constantly busy. You endlessly seek distraction. You might even find yourself unconsciously creating small stresses or picking little fights just to feel a sense of familiar chaos. This is all happening because your body is stuck in high alert mode, making true peace feel like an imminent threat. Let the psychological weight of this realization sit with you for a second. To a survivor, relaxation doesn't feel like rest, it feels like dropping your guard. And when your brain genuinely believes you're still in a war zone, dropping your guard is the absolute last thing it will ever allow you to do.
So, we've looked at how we view others and our environment. Now, let's turn inward for our final thematic cluster: how early trauma dictates how survivors view their own needs and emotions. Let's talk about self-reliance and the empathy shield.
This brings us to defensive self-reliance. Now, extreme independence is highly praised in our culture, but we really need to reframe it here. This isn't just a quirky, go-getter personality trait. It is a brutal lesson learned very, very early on. When the support you needed as a child was totally inconsistent or maybe completely absent, your brain adapted by minimizing its own needs. It decided that asking for help wasn't just a weakness, it was a literal risk. This is a massive piece of that armor we talked about earlier. You might be the kind of person who handles absolutely every problem entirely alone. You might feel physically uncomfortable, like actively squirming in your seat when you have to depend on someone else, even when you're completely overwhelmed. It is so vital to recognize that this extreme independence wasn't a choice you made. It was pure necessity. You had to do it to survive. And that perfectly tees up our fifth trait, the empathy shield. Experiencing early pain grants you emotional intelligence far beyond the average person. You can comfort others effortlessly because you're so acutely aware of unspoken suffering. But there is a major hidden cost. You hide your own pain just as effectively. You start viewing your own emotions as just inconvenient to everybody else.
This is the invisible reality for so many of you watching. You became the one who listens without judgment. You are the reliable rock for everyone in your life. But you do it because you learned early on that expressing your own emotions was unsafe. So you carry your immense strength quietly. You completely hold space for everyone else, while leaving very little, if any, room for yourself. Okay, so we understand the problem. The armor is heavy. But where do we go from here? Let's talk about unlearning these survival traits and finding a path forward. And this brilliantly illustrates something profound about the human spirit. Yes, trauma is horrific, but it doesn't just break people. It actively builds incredibly rare resilience. It grants you a profound, completely unique perspective on the world. These survival traits we've outlined today, they are not your entire identity. They are testament to your unyielding strength and your mind's absolute brilliance in keeping you safe.
But here is the thing. The patterns that once protected you may now be weights you must put down. The heavy armor you wore in childhood, it was absolutely necessary back then. But you are in peacetime now. You really are. And the armor that once protected you is now simply too heavy. It might be the very weight you need to put down to finally allow yourself to experience genuine safety and true rest.
So I'll leave you lingering on this final thought as we wrap up our explainer today. We've journeyed through the hypervigilance, the crushing emotional accountability, the deep fear of calmness, the extreme self-reliance, and the empathy shield. Which of these hidden traits hit the closest to home for you? And much more importantly, which one are you finally ready to put down and unlearn? Take some time to reflect on that. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one.